What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Punching Up. I'm your host, Maya May. I thought we were supposed to punch Nazis, not make podcasts with them. What are we even doing? Trump might have his best investor on the White House lawn pitching Tesla. Democrats have to figure out how we are going to respond to this. Normal people have to figure out how we are going to respond to this. We need to be on the same page about what we're fighting for, who we're fighting for, and what we're fighting against. But that gets a lot more complicated when the Nazis are in the house. Like literally, I think they're in the White House. And so we have to figure out how we're supposed to protect American democracy when the people in charge are trampling all over the Constitution and doing it in such a way, and so quickly, that people are barely having a chance to catch their breath so that they can fight back. And so on tonight's show, I have a couple things I want to accomplish. I want to establish a shared truth about what the fuck is going on. And I want to point us in the right direction of where we need to go, which is something that we seem to be having a hard time doing. I'm talking about you, Gavin Newsom. What the fuck? To do this, I have someone who tried to tell us all about this. We first chatted almost 3 years ago, but apparently we like to learn the hard way because all the expertise is here. We just keep ignoring it. But I'm so grateful that Ann Nelson decided to come back on the show today. Ann is an award-winning journalist, author of Red Orchestra, the story of Berlin Underground and the circle of friends who resisted Hitler, as well as the Shadow Network. Hi, Ann. How are you?
Hey there.
All right. We're in a pickle, as they say.
Yeah, we are in a pickle. And it's one, I mean, I don't want to mix my metaphors here, but it's a reverberating pickle because it's affecting our relationships with Canada and Mexico and Europe, and it's affecting our reputation as a people, supposedly allying ourselves with a Russian dictatorship as opposed to a democratic country that's been invaded. It goes in so many directions at once, and that's part of the problem. I think people are overwhelmed by the daily diet of insult and outrage.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to stay focused. At this point, I almost need a journal that's just a tracking fascism and its effects on the American people and the rest of the world journal, where it's like I write the things I'm grateful for that I still have, like my rights, but then I write in all of the things that are happening daily that are impacting those rights. And yes, it is reverberating throughout the world. And you have a Guggenheim for your work on media in Nazi Germany. And so when we last talked, like the idea that America would be close to that was something that we were like whispering in circles and sometimes shouting. And now we're here. Because remember when we weren't supposed to say the fascism word?
I remember when we were talking about conspiracy theories and everybody was shouting it down because it was unfashionable to have conspiracy theories. And I've spent actually the last 6 years saying, well, it's a secret plan. I don't care whether you call it a conspiracy or not, but that it's there. It's not a theory.
No, it's and now we're feeling it for the people who are paying attention, and that's the people who watch the show, and then hopefully the people who watch the show will forward this to other people and say, hey, here's somebody who was talking about this years ago. Maybe we should pay attention to them now. We're not.
Well, it's not secret anymore. No. So now it's neither secret nor it's a theory, and over a year ago, I wrote an article about Project 2025. And walked through a dozen points that were in it that I considered outrageous. I mean, so outrageous that I was almost mocking. And now I'm looking at horror, because I didn't, in my heart of hearts, I didn't really believe it would come to pass. I guess I kept holding on to this hope that we would avert the latest chapter of the disaster. And now we're living it. And, let's face it, it hurts. Right? Mm-hmm. It hurts. Yesterday, I saw a post that Donald Trump sent out that was a pink triangle with an X through it about LGBTQ people in the Pentagon. And of course, the pink triangle was what the Nazis used to designate gay people in the concentration camps because it was a crime to be gay. And the revival of the pink triangle from the president, all I can say is I keep thinking that I should have lost my ability to be shocked, but I haven't.
No, I haven't either. And I know when I saw it come through my feed, it was one of those things where I was like, I don't even want to focus or zero in on this right now because it will lose my mind. And part of fighting fascism is not losing our minds. And I know for me, when we were trying to alert people about all of this, and I, in my heart of hearts, was hoping it wouldn't happen, but I also didn't want to sound like the crazy person. Like I didn't want to scream at everybody I know. I joked about it. Like I was like, oh, I used to be the fun friend. Now I'm like are you fighting fascism friend? And now I wish I had more friends fighting fascism. I'm trying to find them right now. And it's a little bit difficult, and we'll get into that. And I also want people to know, hey, everyone, we're going to talk about how to resist. We're going to talk about resistance towards the end of the show. But first, we got to dive into the tough things like Elon Musk at the White House on the lawn, the driveway with a Tesla. What? Because I saw you post about it, but what's your take on this whole Tesla sales, Trump outward open corruption?
Well, I am an unusual American in that I've never owned a car.
What?
Yeah. I live in New York City. I walk 3, 4, 5 miles a day, happily. So yeah. And I have had an eye on Elon Musk for a while. And I think that understanding his psychology is central here. Until 2022, he thought it was fashionable for him to be a Democrat. So that is very recent, right? And what I understand about him is that because of his psychological wiring, which is not the same as everyone else's, he is governed by impulsivity, and he's very reactive. And apparently he felt that some of the COVID restrictions were detrimental to his business interests. And he switched at the same time that there was this community in Silicon Valley of what is known as the PayPal mafia, who had long-standing interests in the Republican Party and shared goals of cutting corporate taxes, cutting taxes for billionaires, etc. And then the other part of it that I find extremely interesting is that a significant number of them, including Musk, Peter Thiel, and the owner of the Los Angeles Times, all have personal ties to South Africa and the apartheid regime.
Coincidence?
Oh, yeah, totally. And in fact, Musk's own history is that his father was a Canadian extremist with basically a neo-Nazi party in Canada, and found fellow people who shared his belief in South Africa, and that was the environment for Elon Musk. So when you put this together, and this whole idea about immigration and race and white superiority, and then they put a little frosting of Christian nationalism on top, then it becomes what I call an accelerant for what was going on already. So you had the Christian nationalism going on, you had the white supremacy going on, you had all of these movements that were particularly in southern states and Midwestern states, and not so much on the coast. But over time, they've become less and less localized. The internet has taken them to a new level, and the internet's media systems. And of course, in my book, Shadow Network, I talk about the construction of the media system, starting with the radio broadcast, then going to a fundamentalist religious television, now going to websites that you just keep ramping it up. And then in 2022, Elon Musk buys Twitter, right, and turns it into his own personal vehicle and a pro-Trump vehicle, and automatically triggers these millions of followers into his echo chamber. So that's been going on.
And so that brings us to where we're at now, which we talked previously about how to frame this. And I'm glad you brought up Christian nationalists, because before you were like, yes, they're a part of it, but we can't necessarily frame it just that way. And now we're seeing this oligarchy, these billionaires take over. Are we getting closer to framing this correctly? Because now it seems like it is a us versus the billionaires framing that is coming out of all of this.
I've always felt that was the case. And, you know, again, having grown up in Oklahoma and among evangelicals and fundamentalists, you know, I just had to say that in the past, they had neither the will nor the means to take over the country. That's not who these people were. So they became mobilized politically and put to the service of initially fossil fuel interests and the Coke machine, which mobilized them to deliver the votes that the Koch's ideology couldn't deliver, because it ended up being detrimental to them, right? And that is why you have the power of information systems and education, where they're attacking and dismantling public schools. They're attacking higher education. They're removing funding from higher education. And so that makes these populations ever more vulnerable to the messaging that is deluging them from their systems. And they just keep compounding it. So you have, I'm just finishing a paper for Georgetown about the most recent shift into the mass audiences for podcasts like Joe Rogan's and others, where they set the hook. So you start out talking about men's health, and then you pull them into martial arts, and then you pull them into militia ideology, right? But maybe you're just this guy looking for information about vitamins, right? And you get pulled into that universe.
I love the framework that you're creating for that, because I spend a lot of time in the gym. And so the whole wellness influencer to right-wing pipeline is something that I've long been interested in, because you're absolutely right. It's like men's health becomes the gateway drug. And so they have figured this out, and they are investing millions upon millions of dollars in this infrastructure. So when Gavin Newsom asks Charlie Kirk on his podcast, Charlie Kirk, who we know has received tons of funding from billionaires. What's the strategy there? What's the play that Gavin Newsom could possibly be up to? Because I don't see it.
Gavin Newsom is on the other coast. I'm in New York City, so I will not opine on what Gavin's up to. And, you know, given that, you know, his previous main squeeze is now a Trump in-law.
Yeah.
Anybody's guess. But I will say that I think most of my colleagues have underestimated this undertow of public health disinformation. Mm-hmm. I wrote about it in the context for the Washington Spectator for COVID disinformation. But now we're seeing it erupt all over the country in terms of vaccine disinformation in a really terribly damaging way. So we now have measles outbreaks in Texas that have spread to New Mexico and Oklahoma. We've got tuberculosis in record numbers in Kansas. Tuberculosis, right? Like 19th century disease, right? That should not exist in our time. And as you say, it's a combination of populations that have been played with different messaging systems. So it's where don't trust Fauci segues into don't trust big pharma, segues into don't vaccinate your children and run the risk of having them die of measles.
And trust is the bedrock of any functioning society of any relationship, as we all know. And so they know if they disrupt trust, and when I say they, I mean the fascists, I mean the Nazis, if they disrupt trust, so we no longer trust our neighbor even now, as many of the laws that they're putting out there have to do with, like, bounty laws and being vigilant of each other. How in the world do we get through this? Because it seems like you started as a war journalist, and it seems like we're fighting a war on many fronts. We have, like, the information war, the cyber warfare, and now it seems like this is leading into actual war. So, based on what you know from this, and what we're seeing right now, like, all the branches of government have been captured. Like, what phase of war are we in?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I just finished reading Renee DiResta's book, Invisible Rulers, which I highly recommend, because it's about the construction through media systems, digital media, of an alternate reality and how that worked. And she uses a very useful term, a funhouse mirror, right? So you stand in front of a funhouse mirror and it distorts everything. You're the same thing, but the image is the thin man or fat man or whatever comes out in the mirror. So what happens is that when I was reporting on the wars in El Salvador and Guatemala, you could read the legacy media in the United States and have more or less of a factual notion of what was going on. There was a battle on this volcano. There was a diplomatic meeting in Mexico City, right? And you could disagree about all kinds of things, but you kind of had the same basis of fact. In El Salvador, when you read the local newspapers, it was what I called a meta language, where, for example, if a person was seized from their home, handcuffed, tortured, killed, and their body was dumped, their picture would show up in the paper and they would say they disappeared, right? And everybody knew what happened to them. They didn't disappear, right? In a proof of air. They were the subject of a state-sanctioned murder. So everything that you read in the Salvadoran newspaper was in this language that you had to interpret. And I've been following the right-wing media, both religious and non-religious, now for a good 10 years or more. And it's the same kind of thing. It's using, it's taking single incidents and blowing them up to make them sound like they're generalized. So God forbid any African American should ever commit any crime anywhere.
Ever.
Because their picture will be shown as they commit all the crimes, right? I mean, a trans person cannot cross the street without being, if they say hello to a child, they're immediately a groomer, It's and the thing is that if you keep pounding at people and deluging them with this information, and you have the rest of their information culture dying off through the local newspapers, through the decreasing audiences for network news, and then you compound it with Fox and the kind of indoctrination that's going on in churches through Turning Point Faith and other organizations. You have people surrounded by this, and they're going to believe it because it's what they see and what they know and what people around them believe. So when you say, what do you do about it? This is the same that the people in Nazi Germany had to do. They had to find out what the facts were and distribute them to the population however they could.
So, I want to get into that a little bit later in the show, because we are going to talk about how each one of us can resist and stay safe while resisting, because that now seems to be something that is of a concern that wasn't necessarily a concern over the last 10, 15 years of, can we protest? Are we allowed to protest? Are our First Amendment rights protected? The thing that is supposed to make America, America. So we are going to get into this, but I want to talk a little bit about the shadow network, because in that book, these were things that were happening. They were hidden. Now they are out of the shadows. They are in the light. What do you think has happened that have people just accepted that everything is corrupt? What has happened to the American brain, to the American psychology, that this can be in the open and people are just kind of like shrugging their shoulders at it?
Well, Maya, that's a question of who's people and who are Americans, because people that I know are largely horrified and terrified. And I just came from a university session of elder statesmen, people who had worked in the government in various capacities, and they were saying, we've never seen this happen before. We've never seen the basic institutions of our democracy attacked in this way before, except during the Civil War. Right? I mean, that is how extreme it is. And these are people who are very conservative in their expression. I've never heard them talk like this before. So they are highly informed, right? They read everything. They analyze everything. Then you go to people whose only source of information is their Facebook feed, which is populated by people like them replicating this messaging, and whatever podcasts they listen to, what they hear in church. And they're going to be told, they are being told, that yes, eggs are expensive and it's Biden's fault. They're being told, yes, tariffs are detrimental to the economy, but it's going to be better in the end. Now, my theory is that as long as it's something abstract, such as something going on in Europe or the Middle East, they can tune it out or hear it the way they want to hear it. When it affects them personally, they will have to stop and think and make different sense of it. So you've got these little avenues coming along, such as what happens if the Social Security checks are delayed? Because how are they not delayed if you're firing such a great percentage of the staff? I mean, I think that they will continue to be lied to. And the job before us is to find the harm that is being done to American voters, especially in critical districts and states, and make sure that they understand why they're happening, where it's coming from, and how it directly affects them.
And so it's the highly educated, right, who are paying attention, who know what's happening, right? The people I mostly associate with are also horrified. However, I have plenty of people, I call them my apoliticals, the apoliticals in my life, who not only are they not horrified, they have no idea what's going on. And it's not because they don't have time to know what's going on. It's that they've chosen to tune out. So these are folks who don't have, an hour for politics because it depresses them, won't watch what's happening in the world, but will watch, Severance. They're tuned to Apple TV. They like the fictionalized dystopia when we're living in an actual dystopia. And so, God, that sounded so depressing. And so I want to quickly pivot to the resistance, because even during World War II, there were people resisting. And you write about that in your book, in Red Orchestra. Can you talk about that as an analogous to right now? What can resistance look like right now based on what you've researched, what you've understood?
Yeah, well, I think you said something really important about the people tuning out, because they're not tuning out, they're displacing, right? So if they're looking at fictional dystopias, that's because they feel uncomfortable. And what they lack is a sense of agency, and what they're crippled by is a sense of cynicism, right? And when I was going around the country speaking at the documentary Bad Faith, I heard this over and over again. voting won't make any difference, right? I wish I could go back and ask every single person who said that whether they still feel the same way, because we have massive disruptive changes going on in our system of government, in our freedoms, and increasingly in our daily lives, where voting for a very, very flawed, imperfect party would have averted the worst of the harm, right? Mm. I mean, it just is so. You wouldn't have all of the cutbacks in the environmental programs. You wouldn't have the attacks on the Department of Education and on public schools. You wouldn't have the attacks on public health and this insanity about vaccines that is killing children, killing American children, right? If you voted for the flawed but lesser evil, right, you wouldn't have all of that going on, and people's lives at stake.
And some of that, the feeling, the things that are happening are it's immediate, right? We're feeling it. And I feel like moms are at the front lines of this a lot of the times, because they're the ones managing the household budget. They're the ones who are seeing education be dismantled. But a lot of this is stuff that isn't necessarily going to have an impact for a while. So knowing that, and
I don't know. I mean, have you bought eggs recently?
I haven't, but that's because I'm trying to be vegan.
Yeah, I like my eggs, and I'm not used to paying $13 a dozen.
I have heard they're expensive in New York. In California, they weren't that expensive last I checked. We're hovering around the either empty, not there, or around $6 a carton.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and eggs, bird flu and all that, but there are going to be a lot of prices that are going to be going up steeply, because the tariff idea is economically and mathematically impossible. Right. It's about rhetoric, and it may rev up the base, but ultimately the base is 30% of the voters. And you've got the kind of disruption that makes the business community very uncomfortable. Disruption is bad for business. Right. 60% of Americans have investments in the stock market, right, of some kind. And the stock market has not been happy.
No, not doing so good.
No. Elon Musk is very unpopular. He has less than he has a 30% approval rating. And people feel that he is a wild card, which he is. He's erratic. He's not an elected official. He's in everybody's business. So
it's wild even that we're talking about approval ratings for somebody who isn't actually supposed to be a part of our government. And I'm just like, oh.
I know, but we live in wild times, my friend. I mean, it's like, how many things am I talking about that I never would have predicted? But what I'm saying is that I don't believe, based on a lot of conversations, that people are getting what they thought they voted for. And you've got buyer's remorse showing up. And you've also got some sacred cows being slaughtered, right? Mm-hmm. So in the American political mythos, the respect for veterans is a very core value. And the attacks on the Veterans Administration is going to affect massive numbers of veterans. Mm-hmm. There are symbolic funds, like what goes to September 11th first responders who have health consequences from the attack that have been slashed. Now, I know a lot of those guys, and a lot of them voted for Trump, and there's a lot of sense of having been deceived and betrayed in these communities. And these are blue collar people, and they're not just in New York City. Veterans affairs are a national issue, a very big national issue. You have all kinds of repercussions that are going to be playing out. I understand that in California, there are undocumented workers who are not showing up for their jobs because they're afraid of ICE raids reasonably. Well, a very large percentage of American elder care is based on undocumented workers. It's just the reality. And we have a growing population of elderly people who need home care. So you're going to be hitting American families very directly with punches in the gut, where you have working parents with kids whose school is falling apart because it's not getting funding, and then their elderly parents don't have anyone to deliver their meds, and this and that. And, life starts to fray very quickly. And my belief is that's where the impetus into next year's elections will be coming from.
So because what you're describing is a pressure cooker, right?
Yeah.
We have, people's voices are being repressed in the sense that these town halls are being shut down because they don't want to hear from their constituents. Republicans want to pretend as if everything is fine. And those are just left-wing agitators showing up at the town halls. And so people are becoming more and more disgruntled. And what I'm seeing online is that people are asking when will be the thing that puts people either out into the street protesting, or there's a lot of theories floating around about what needs to be done, whether it's a general strike or massive protests. And so as this pressure builds, what can people do? This is an exploratory conversation. What can people do, and what have people done in the past that can help to wake the people up who maybe haven't felt the pressure yet?
So I have very mixed feelings about protests. One thing that I took away from Black Lives Matter is that the protests were absolutely understandable, but I watched the right-wing media take a single violent episode, a single broken store window, and blow it up into this terror campaign. And it was then used as an excuse to roll in repressive forces that were basically throwing red meat to the base. So my analysis is that in some ways they backfired. I mean, they achieved some things, but they also lost some ground in other ways. One thing that interests me a lot is the consumer protest. So there was one on Friday that was about Amazon. And there are certain corporations that have been very adamantly supportive of the administration. And I don't know whether consumers can organize to the point of making any difference in the numbers, but maybe they can, because, I mean, you see what's happening with Tesla stock, right? And apparently a lot of this is driven by California, which is one of the prime areas for Tesla sales. So now people are very nervous about buying a Tesla. So that is interesting. I don't know whether there are other ways to vote with your pocketbook. But for example, Amazon has, I think, kind of, folded in terms of its compliance with the administration. And we have a very hungry cat. And I'm told that if you buy your cat food and your litter from Chewy instead of Amazon, that's a gesture. And part of what we're talking about with these people, your friends who watch, escapist television, is the sense that they utterly lack agency, that it's a corrupt system, nothing that they do makes any difference, right? And it's hard to escape that sense of despair and cynicism. So finding anything that anyone can do as collective action, I think, is what to do for the moment. So, for example, in April, I believe it's 17th, there is the anniversary of Paul Revere's ride in Boston. And the Old North Church in Boston, where it took place, is going to have an address by Heather Cox Richardson, and they're going to ring the bells for freedom.
Wow.
And there is a campaign underway to have churches all over the country who want to preserve our democracy to ring their bells on that day. Now, there's nothing illegal about it. You can't get arrested for it, but it is a symbol, and it is something where you get other people saying, why are they ringing the bells, right? and then you use that as a moment to inform and educate and organize. I think that getting people attuned to the crisis and what they can do, working towards the midterm elections, is the best idea I can think of at the moment.
Yeah, I think the sound of the bells, the alarm, all, and we know the etymology of alarm, all, is to arms, that's how we're waking people up, ringing the bell. I think personally, they should ring the bell nonstop until we have a critical mass of people who are willing to actually work for the democracy that they enjoy. Just keep ringing the bell.
See, part of what you need to do is create a permission structure, right? And if you pull out too far ahead, and if you go overly into the dramatic realm, you get people arrested and beaten up and taken out of the action, right? So I think for this moment, simply finding very visible symbolic acts that are uniting, mm-hmm. and that use the language of democracy and preserving the country that we want to defend. I think that can build towards next year, and again, use every opportunity to help people make these connections, right? Mm-hmm. Why did they close the Social Security office? Why is your uncle, who's a military veteran, not getting? Why is nobody answering the phone at Social Security, right? I mean, mm-hmm. why? And it really does, fortunately, have a very simple answer. It's what these people did, and you didn't vote for this.
I loved it, that the role of the people can be to help tether the average person to the truth. I don't see our elected officials doing that enough.
So you read my book?
Which one? Yes.
Shadow Network?
Yes.
Okay. So the key for me is the year 2010. So Obama wins in 2008. The fundamentalists are aggrieved because he is LGBTQ friendly, right? Mm-hmm. And his middle name is Hussein and everything else. I mean, they just, black, they're really, and he's black. I mean, like what's to like, right? And the Kochs are furious because of the environmental regulations, right? And the threats of taxes. So in 2010, collectively, they say, screw the Republican Party. They're going to work with the Democrats to govern the country. And that's not acceptable. What we're going to do is, number one, have the Tea Party revolt, which is an astroturf revolt, where they pay people, partly through Koch money, to stage these little dramatic events, right, and disrupt town halls and so on and so forth. And also develop I-360, which is the data platform that's used to primary out moderate Republicans and bring in MAGA Republicans through manipulation of data and voter files. So the key here is that the Republican Party kind of toodles along, and then it is radicalized, subverted, and magnified by this parallel movement that didn't even have a name. So in the book, I use the example of Claire McCaskill's campaign in Missouri against Josh Hawley. And the Democrats have their campaign and they spend their money, and the Republicans have their campaign and they spend their money. Well, the Council for National Policy and the NRA, the National Rifle Association, and the Susan B. Anthony Group have a parallel campaign that is arguably larger than the Republicans, reinforcing it. So what that means for us is that we can't wait for the Democratic Party to get its act together.
I'm mad because I'm like, but that's their job. I was like, that's what they're supposed to be doing.
And that's how Paul Weyrich felt about the Republicans. It's like, where are they? Guess I'll have to do it myself, right? And I look at it as, I am something of an historian, and leaders emerge in different ways, and it's not always through the channels of of the system, right? Sometimes they emerge, sometimes they're created, I mean, and I think it's really important to learn from what they did, learn from their successes, because you can't just say we're right, they're wrong, and therefore we win. It hasn't worked that way.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because we keep losing. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So done with that. So Trump did not, if you looked at the Republican leadership in 2014, Trump would not have been on the list. Far from the top of the list. He wouldn't have been on the list at all. He was somebody that emerged, and he emerged out of entertainment culture, and we have to take that seriously. And we need to look at entertainment culture for intelligent, articulate people that could carry the banner. And there are a few, that are interesting, that are not on the usual lists of candidates.
I think it's important that people hear that. And as much as I want to pound the table about us having to do it ourselves, you're 100% right in the sense that this is the call. This is the call right now. This is the call to action for everybody who is looking around going, what happened? This is how we can have agency, and this is how we can be involved, and this is how we can find our way out of where we're at right now while we still can, because that is my growing fear as I feel that the Overton window is shifting, and I feel like we're starting to accept things that we wouldn't have. And I don't want people waking up a year from now and going, oh, what I miss for the last year? Why are all my neighbors missing? I don't want that to be our reality. And so I'm gonna keep fighting the fight, I guess, and trying to ask the right questions. The last question I have for you, and we kind of touched on this already, but this is a question that I want to start asking everybody is, and I know most of the people in your life are engaged in politics, but let's say there's one that's not engaged, that has no idea what's going on in the world right now. If we need the people who are disengaged to be involved, how are you talking to the disengaged people in your life?
Well, even the disengaged people are starting to be concerned about one aspect or another of events that affect them. And if you think about it now, everybody has a gay relation or a gay friend, or, there's somebody that they care about in their lives. And of course, we're not at the point yet where the persecution of trans people has been fully extended to every gay person. But you've already had people who are members of the MAGA officialdom say they're going after gay marriage. Mm-hmm. And you just replicate that across the board. Everybody knows young children. Everybody knows this and that. And I think that connecting it to their lives, giving them actual information, right? And doing it in a sympathetic way, like starting a conversation with, I know you care about, and I'm concerned about, right? I mean, I have this, I have this thing about kids. I've always loved kids. I worked for Head Start back in the day, and for me, children who have life-threatening cases of measles because they're not vaccinated hurts my heart.
Yep.
And I can talk to pretty much anybody about that. And most people, even the unengaged, can care about that. It's just so wrong, right? And I also think that there's a way to kind of set the table for the conversation and say, it's so unnecessary. When I was a kid, we all lined up for our vaccinations. And so none of us had polio in my school because we were vaccinated. I don't want that to come back. I don't want to, So, I mean, I think that you can apply the same thing to caring for disabled veterans, for caring for other people. And yes, there is a question of finding the germ of self-interest, right? I mean, I have relations in Nebraska who farm corn and soybeans. Well, they're expecting a 1/3 cut in their income this year because of the tariffs. Well, that's going to hurt. We all voted for Trump.
Yeah. And especially as prices increase. And I think what you said, finding the germ of self-interest is So key, because even if people aren't empathetic to what other people are going through, everybody has that survival instinct.
And I think, I think that that's a Republican, it's part of their secret sauce, because they've done that forever, except they don't tell the truth. But they do make people think that their taxes will be lower. And it's not their taxes that get lowered. It's the billionaires' taxes that get lowered. And they're stuck with the bad results. So I think using the same tactic, but to be truthful, and to recognize, Democrats traditionally like messaging that's about helping everybody else, right? And so let's think about it. You're the farmer in Nebraska, and you have all of these critical states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, right? These key states to winning races. And the voters are overwhelmingly white. And they're largely Protestant. And being human, they look at elections and say, what's in it for me? Because that is a human impulse. And I think taking that reality and using it, right? Say, you got the veteran, you got the kid, you got the schools, you got, roads that aren't being fixed, you got, pollution in your community. This is what's in it for you.
That's perfect. And thank you so much for bringing calm clarity to the show, because I feel like...
Sorry, I went off there a little bit on Charlie Kirk.
No, I mean, some things have to be said, okay? Some things have to be said. And right now, since he's out there talking to Gavin Newsom, probably a lot of people who didn't know who he was are now wondering, who's this guy? And so that's that guy.
I'm sorry. He is appearing at pulpits across the country as Turning Point faith. And his religion is as fake as a $2 bill. And they're holding education programs in churches and giving them free pizza for indoctrination. And I just think that American Christians should be offended by that kind of blatant manipulation.
And I think that's going to have to be part of the messaging as we're figuring out our messaging going forward is, yes, like shame for shame.
Well, yeah. And I keep thinking, you've been schnookered.
I mean, yes, I actually saw a parody of Hamilton, and it's like, you've been got. And it was singing that Trump voters have been got. They were taken advantage of. They were lied to, and they're slowly going to start to see the consequences of that. And so,
but you've got to give them an alternative that they feel they can own, and that's the challenge before us. Find the candidates, find the campaign workers, find the people who will commit and engage and address the problem with a measure of sympathy and, not, I told you so is not a good campaign.
No, as much as we all feel it right now, like that's the thing. It's like I struggle on the inside. I want to be like, oh, we tried to tell you, but.
And what I really hate is people who say they get what they deserved, because nobody deserves sick children. Right.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. When it comes down, everybody forgets that at the end of the day, there are children and kids who are being hurt by all of these policies, and they didn't ask for it. Anywhere in the world where there is a child, that child did not ask for it. And so,
and neither did their parents. Yeah. I mean, so yeah, we need to cut each other a little slack and restore what holds us together as a country.
I love it. It's the give each other a little bit of grace episode, come back to the basics. That's what we are doing. Thank you, Anne, for joining me, for coming back. You are welcome back anytime. Hopefully, if we come together in 2 years' time, 2.5 years, however long it was since the last time we chatted, hopefully we'll have good things to talk about. Check out her book, The Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. Excellent book, as well as Right Orchestra on how to resist everything that is happening right now. And it sounds like you have an article coming out soon about the men's health wellness. And so I definitely want people to look for that. And where can people find you on X, Twitter?
A Nelson A.
A. Nelson A. Please follow Anne. She's always dialed into the things that actually matter. I love the grace that you are giving. I will attempt to do the same because now I feel like I need to try to be the bigger person as well. Thank you, Anne. I will hopefully see you again here sometime soon.
Excellent. Thank you.
Right. Thanks. All right, y'all. Okay. We have to go back to the basics. That is what I'm hearing. We need to go back to the basics, which is understanding that not everybody who voted for this deserves this, and that in order to come together, we have to have a little bit of sense of empathy, but also an understanding about human instincts. And that means we have to show people what's in it for them. So that's the lesson that I am taking away from this as far as going forward, what we need to do. So we need to be on the same page, right, about what the truth is and tether each other to the truth. So continue to speak that wherever you see these lies. I know it's hard to push back on them, but we have to continue to do so because otherwise all that'll be out there are lies. And we have to go with the simple idea that we need each other, guys. And so we can't fight our way out of this. I know, trust me, I would like to every time I'm in the boxing gym, which is 3, 4, 5 times a week. I want to punch my way out of this, but united we stand, divided we fall. Even when there's Nazis on the inside, we're going to have to try to figure out how to get them to wake up and realize that that is not an American value. So back to the basics, maybe have them read the Constitution again, or I don't know, the part of the Bible that's all like, be nice to thy neighbor, those basics. So this has been Punching Up. I've been Maya May. I will see you guys next week. In the meantime, we have a ton of other shows on Resolute Square. You can check them out. Make sure to follow us on all of the socials at Resolute Square, and you can follow me at Maya on Stage everywhere, all platforms. Until then, see you next week.